Hello everyone, this is your quick hit for chapter 1, Communicating at Work. And as you read this chapter, or as you're reading this chapter, I want you to think about if you are a leader on the job. And the word leader can mean so many different things to so many different people. You might be a leader with certain groups of people within your job, but when you are around others, you might be a little bit submissive. So when you think about being a leader at work, ask yourself, does my communication style influence whether I'm seen or whether I am a leader on the job? So with this quick hit, we're just going to quickly go through a couple of things that I want to give to you for chapter 1. And first things first is the definition of communication, which is the transactional process by which people interacting in a particular way negotiate the meanings of verbal and nonverbal symbols in order to achieve shared understanding. And if you see this NIB right here that's located within at the end of the definition in any of the quick hits that I design, that means, or that stands for not in book, and that just means that it's not specifically in your textbook, but you're still responsible for it for any quizzes, exams, final exam, or assessments. And the best definition, to me, this is the best definition of communication because it lets us know, first things first, that communication is transactional, meaning that it involves some sort of exchange. It's a give and take when it comes to communication. Ask yourself, have you ever had miscommunication with a coworker? Have you ever had miscommunication with your boss? When it comes to miscommunication with a coworker or a boss, or even miscommunication with your family members, significant others, or friends, it's not just one particular person that's responsible for that miscommunication. Actually, if you look at the definition of communication, both parties are responsible. It's the sender who's responsible because they're trying to send verbal and nonverbal symbols in order to achieve some sort of shared understanding, but it's also the receiver or the listener who's listening to the message as well. If they don't stand up and say, hey, wait a minute, I didn't understand what you said, can you clarify that? Think of a situation in which you had miscommunication and the other person misunderstood you, but they didn't ask a question for clarification. So when we talk about transactional process, that means both parties are responsible, both the sender and the receiver. The sender is responsible for sending the correct words, verbal and nonverbal, such as eye contact, facial expression, things of that nature, and choosing the correct channel to communicate through. But if miscommunication occurs and the sender doesn't ask questions or doesn't clarify or doesn't give the proper responses back, then they're at fault as well. Speaking of, how does communication work? We have an encoder, which is the sender, and the decoder, which is the receiver. The sender is choosing, the emphasis in that definition is the word choose. They're choosing verbal and nonverbal symbols, and the decoder is the receiver, and they are attempting to interpret those symbols. Choosing specific verbal and nonverbal symbols so that we have some sort of shared meaning or shared understanding, while the receiver or the decoder is going to attempt. They're essentially saying, hey, I'm going to try to interpret what it is you're trying to say, but keep in mind, the encoder and the decoder are doing this. They're communicating based on what they know. So sometimes when we have miscommunication on the job or miscommunication in our personal life, it's probably because we have different meanings for certain words and or phrases, which is what I'm about to get to. The channel is the medium that you choose to transmit the message through. Your textbook mentions both lean medium and rich medium. With a lean medium, only one communication code is present, either verbal or nonverbal. We can't see both. We can't see nonverbal and we can't hear verbal. And a rich medium, both communication codes are present. So with a rich medium, the chances of us having miscommunication are very, very slim. And as your textbook mentions, the richest of rich mediums is face-to-face communication. Why? Because I can hear verbal and I can see nonverbal. So if they don't match up or they don't sync up, then I know that I need to clarify something or ask some sort of question. And the example I love that your textbook gives is when you need to communicate something, especially to your boss, And many of you know corporate America works mostly via email, but sometimes the best thing to do is to not email, which would be a lean medium, and instead go directly to that person and speak to them face to face. Why? So that we lessen the chances of miscommunication. However, we call a frame of reference our own perspective, and we personally communicate via our own frame of reference. Your values, your attitudes, your belief, your age, your race, your ethnicity, your gender, your sexual orientation, your social class. Do you live in Tomball or do you live in Galveston? Do you live on the east side or do you live in Sugar Land? Are you in River Oaks or are you in Cypress? All of that really depends on how you encode and decode messages. And what that essentially means is, depending upon your frame of reference will determine how you choose to personally communicate. Sometimes we have miscommunication because two people have two different frames of references. Think about it like this. If you choose one of the richest areas of Houston, Memorial, the Woodlands, River Oaks, Rice Village, and then one of the poorest areas of Houston, 3rd Ward, 5th Ward, East Side, Acres Homes, two people coming out of those two areas are going to communicate differently. And people always say, but they're communicating incorrectly. And my response is, no, they're only communicating based upon what they know, based upon their frame of reference. So sometimes we come across coworkers and on the job who we think they're not communicating very well, when in reality, you have to figure, well, they come from a different place than I do, most likely. They have different values, probably different beliefs, attitude. They may be of a different age, of a different gender, sexual orientation, social class, things of that nature. So that could influence the way that they communicate, but that does not mean they know any less about A, communication, and B, the business. So in elements of communication, first things first, we understand communication context, which is just the environment that you communicate in. We have to know what our environment is in the workplace. And essentially, we have to know what we can and cannot say in that particular environment. Think about this example. Have you ever heard of a couple argue while you're at a restaurant? Or you've heard people arguing while you were at the bar or at the club? Or you heard people having certain types of conversation out in public that they probably shouldn't have and should probably hold on to save that within private. That's where we have to understand what the rules and norms are of this particular context. There might be a situation on the job where you can discuss things openly and honestly because of where you work or because of the team that you might be on in that particular corporation or that particular job. We have certain places here at Lone Star. I'm a professor at University Park. There are certain meetings where we can be a little bit more open and honest versus other meetings where we can't say certain things that we would say in the more open and honest meetings. We have to understand what the rules are about this place, about this organization, about our team, about our boss, and what the norms are. Remember, they're two different things. Rules are set in stone. Norms are just things that people do because everyone else does. We just follow them. But norms are not set in stone, so norms are not necessarily a rule. Typically with norms, you just follow along with what everyone else does. If you're brand new on a corporation or a job and you're noticing no one else is saying certain things or no one else is talking about certain things, maybe personal or about the company or about the business or about the boss, then the norm is we just don't talk about that here. However, when you come to happy hour with us, then we can let loose and relax. And then finally, noise. Your book mentions this can interfere with communication. And this is pretty easy to understand. Physical noise is just external noise, stuff outside that could probably interfere with our communication process. Think about being on your job or in the job and what could possibly interfere with you listening or hearing or communicating successfully and what could increase miscommunication. Physiological noise lies within the receiver. Whoops, I don't know what happened there. Physiological noise. This lies within the receiver. It could be that they're hard of hearing. They may not have, they may have a loss of vision. They may have some sort of disability. We can't count out people that we work with that could have a lack of hearing or worse off hearing than others. That's physiological. And then psychological was just forces within inside the receiver that interfere with them communicating successfully, such as maybe their prejudice or their biases, or maybe they have stereotypes, or maybe they're a narcissist or have a high ego, things of that nature. And we do work with a lot of people who get defensive about you critically analyzing their work, or get defensive about being on the job. And that in and of itself could interfere with successful communication. So this was your quick hit for chapter 1. I do apologize that it might be a little bit late, but I still wanted to get it in so that you have this information for any exams and or quizzes that you may take.